Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing something a bit interesting with the build that I've got here. So, I've been watching a lot of videos and been existing in the tabletop space for D&D 2024, basically kind of learning, how the game has changed and all that, the changes that have been made to the classes, and mainly the changes that have been made to build making. So obviously build making is very different in 2024, there's fewer subclasses overall, although the game is backwards compatible if you want to use some of the older stuff. The whole system has changed in the fact that all the subclasses happen at 3rd level, doesn't matter what class you're using. There's a few things that have changed, but the one thing that really stuck out to me were the changes to Paladin. Obviously, people are like, oh, the way they've changed Divine Smite and all that, it's a nerf, blah, 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 blah. And while they're technically correct, I do think now Paladin is stronger in new ways. Specifically, it seems like the Great Weapon Master kind of Greatsword variant, while still being powerful, is not actually considered to be just the solely strongest option anymore. A lot of conversation from people like the Dungeon Dudes or Colby over on T4, for example, is now that dual-wielding Paladin seems to be very effective, if not the most effective. Now, obviously that comes with the caveat that D&D 2024 has things called weapon masteries, which, if you're using the right weapon, can make dual wielding a lot stronger as you're able to make your offhand attack as part of your action. Now, my goal with this build was to kind of test and see how well a dual wielding paladin can hold up in BG3 as compared to D&D 2024 or even D&D 2014, and obviously BG3's Great Weapon Master two-handed variant. This was kind of just a fun idea. I wanted to explore the idea of a dual-wielding paladin, because I don't think I ever really have before. Again, I've made over 200 of these things at this point, so it's a bit hard to remember. And I just kind of wanted to explore this in detail by going pretty much all the way in paladin, but obviously, if we're dual-wielding, there's room for 3 levels of rogue here. You know why. But I did want to kind of experiment and get an idea of how a more dedicated paladin build could work with dual wielding, aside from the usual sword and board or two-handed shenanigans. And honestly, to my surprise, it works very, very well, taking some of the sensibilities that people have picked up from D&D 2024 and applying it to BG3 does actually work. And now obviously I do use mods for my builds, that being Mistress spells and the 1D&D spell revisions, but I would say that this build will work completely vanilla. The only thing that's going to change for you are some spell choices here and there that I might make that are different from this video, but otherwise this is a completely vanilla build. But I do bring up the option of putting in some modded spells here and there, which again all come from tabletop anyway and are available on all platforms, so it's not a huge deal. And finally, I did decide to use Shadowheart for this build, because I ended up kind of pulling some things that would make sense for her to use, and I've kind of gone for a theme of, like, light and darkness in a way with this build, so, like, Twilight, so kind of fits Shadowheart if we're thinking about, her Saluna route and all that sort of thing. Even though Twilight Cleric is not in the game, please make that a mod, please, because we're not getting it in patch 8, so sad. But I thought this build worked really well for her, so if you want to try this out for your Shadowheart run, or, having her as your companion, please give it a go. I think it works quite nicely for her, and I think the look is quite good as well. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the build. Now, as much as I would like to make this just a single class paladin build, since we're dual wielding, we do need to weapon fighting. And as much as we could get that from the gloves of the balanced hands, meaning that we could go for full 12 levels of paladin and get 3 feats, I do think that there are some other glove options which are better overall for the build, rather than just trying to take an extra feat, because our stats are going to work out pretty nicely by the end of this build anyway, and we don't need to take any specific feats. We don't need something like the dual wielder feat or Great Weapon Master, because we are going to be using finesse weapons with this build, so I don't think we need dual wielding for non-light weapons, but if you do want to go down that route, then you could pick up the gloves of the balanced hand instead. All that to say, we're starting off with a level of fighter. This is going to help us out in a bunch of ways. We get all the weapon and armor proficiencies. We would have got that from Paladin anyway, so that's not a big difference. However, we are going to get some cool things like Second Wind, which is a bit of extra healing as a bonus action, which is okay. We're going to mainly be wanting to use our bonus action to attack here, so this might not come up as much, especially since we do have other healing options as well as a Paladin, like Lay on Hands, but hey, it could be useful in a pinch. The main thing that we're going to be getting out of this is obviously the fighting style, which I'll go over quickly now, which is obviously going to be 2-weapon fighting, allowing us to add our ability modifier to the damage of offhand attacks, which we obviously want to do to be able to get the most damage out of our dual wielding. The other thing that we're going to be getting here that I really like is concentration saving throw proficiency through constitution saving throw proficiency. This means that we're going to be able to maintain concentration on important spells way easier. In fact, in my testing for this footage, I didn't actually lose concentration on a spell once, I don't think, which is great. And we definitely want to keep that up because a lot of our abilities that are going to be important for this build are concentration based. This is definitely more of a spell casty paladin than normal. So overall, we definitely want to make sure that we have all of those things, and Fighter really does help with that. Obviously, Shadowheart is a half-elf, giving us access to Civil Militia, which doesn't really matter for this build, Dark Vision, and Fey Ancestry, giving her advantage on saving throws against being charmed and cannot be put to sleep by magic, which is great. We're also going to be playing as a high half-elf, again as Shadowheart, but you don't have to play this build with Shadowheart, you can play this with anybody, so pick your favourite. But of course we do get a cantrip here, and I've just gone with Friends. Since we are going to be charisma-based, at least a little bit, we might as well have this available to us. Obviously, as I said, our starting class is Fighter, and for our ability scores, Strength is at 8, we don't need it. Dexterity is at 16, as it is going to be our main weapon attacking stat. Constitution is at 16, my apologies, because again, I want a decent chunk of HP because we are going to be a frontline fighter, as well as decent concentration saving throws. Most of the spells we use on this build are going to be buffs applied to ourselves, so we do want to make sure that we are able to keep those buffs up. Intelligence is at 8, we don't need it. Wisdom is at 12 because of those nasty saving throws, and Charisma is at 14. I mean, you could try and get this higher if you wanted to, but honestly, it's not entirely necessary. But if you wanted to drop 2 points of Wisdom, put a 15 into here, and bump this up with a half feat later, you could, but I would more focus on maxing out our dexterity, as we'll have ways of kind of bumping up our low spellcasting ability when it comes to equipment and various other effects, so I wouldn't worry about that too much here. As for our skill proficiencies, Shadowheart is an acolyte, giving us religion and insight. Makes perfect sense to me, and I've gone for perception and intimidation for our fighter proficiencies. Right, nothing else to say here, let's move on. At level 2, we could go to level 2 of fighter if we really wanted action surge, but I want to keep this as pure of a paladin, I should say, as possible, because there is some high level features for paladin that I want for this build. So we're going to multiclass straight away into paladin, which is going to get us a few nice things, like our subclass, our oath. Now, for this build, you have the option of picking whatever you want, really. Oath of Ancients, Devotion, Vengeance, Conquest, if you have the mod installed, again available on all platforms, or Oathbreaker. Now, in typical fashion for this channel, the best option for this build is Oath of Vengeance, but not for the usual reasons. Normally people want to take Oath of Vengeance for the level 3 feature Vow of Enmity, which is going to give you advantage on all attacks, hence the Great Weapon Master build. However, I actually want it for different reasons, which I'll be talking about later. But for now, this can use Inquisitor's Might to buff our weapon attacks with 2 radiant damage and can daze enemies for 1 turn. Overall, it's a bit of extra radiant damage, we always like that. We also are going to get access to things at level 1 like Lay on Hands, which we are going to be able to use to heal ourselves and our allies. And because we will be making attacks with our bonus action, the fact that this is an action is going to be a bit more flexible for us to use than normal. Because again, if you're two-handed, you're going to be attacking with your main action. This will give you a bit more versatility to be able to heal and still do damage on the same turn. Next up, at Paladin level 2, we are going to be getting everything that we want from Paladin. Divine Smite, perfect, we absolutely want that, because unlike 2024 D&D, this does not cost our bonus action. So we're going to be able to use this and the full power of dual wielding, which is great. We're also going to gain access to a fighting style. Now, unfortunately, we don't get the 2-weapon fighting style from Paladin here, so that's why we had to take that 1-level dip in Fighter to start. However, here we do actually get to pick another fighting style. Unfortunately, Great Weapon Fighting, Protection, and Dueling are all going to be useless to us with this build, so we can just take Defense to get a +1 bonus to our armor class while wearing armor. We are going to be wearing armor with this build, so it absolutely makes sense to grab this here. We also do get to prepare some spells, but this is where things get a bit iffy. There's only one spell that I absolutely want here, and it is going to be Divine Favor, allowing our weapon attacks to deal an additional 1d4 radiant damage for 3 turns as long as we maintain the concentration. Basically, we trigger this as a bonus action, and all of our main hand attacks are going to get extra radiant damage, but then on the subsequent turns that we have this up, all of our attacks with our offhand weapon are also going to get that extra radiant damage. This is part of the big combo in 2024 D&D because it got a buff there to not require concentration and last a little bit longer, I think, as well. So that extra radiant damage that you're going to be getting each turn with the multiple attacks that you can make does add up. Now, in this game, it's not going to be as much as a Divine Smite, and as low levels, you may want to save more smites rather than spend a spell slot on this maybe once per combat, but if you get this up, and you're able to use Divine Smites, that's a lot of extra radiant damage to be doing. So overall, it's going to work out quite nicely for us, but as we level up with this build, we will actually get a slightly better option from our subclass not too far from here. But Divine Favor is going to be kind of something that we're going to want to keep up if we can for now. For the rest of the spells, well, we don't really want anything that's going to take our concentration, so our options aren't exactly varied. We can get Command here, which is a nice control spell if we want it. Thunderous Smite is one of the only smite spells that doesn't take our concentration and can knock our enemies prone, which is always nice to have. And then your final option just kind of has to be something. You can take a bit of Cure Wounds if you want, because that kind of fits in with Shadowheart's cleric origins. At Paladin level 3, we are going to get our subclass features, including the 2 that you would normally be here for, Abjure Enemy to frighten your enemies, and Vow of Enmity for advantage on all attack rolls. But what I'm here for is the spells. We're going to get Bane, which is okay, but we don't really need it for this build, but the other one is Hunter's Mark, normally exclusive to rangers, and a lot of dual-wielding rangers love to have this spell, and us as a dual-wielding paladin are going to love to have it too. So at total level 4, this is going to replace Divine Favor for us, giving us an extra 1d6 damage of our weapon damage every time we hit a targeted creature. So with the multiple attacks we're able to make from dual-wielding, this will mean more damage in the long run. However, it is a double-edged sword in the fact that it is not a straight upgrade to Divine Favor, in the fact that this is weapon damage, meaning that it's more likely to be resisted than the radiant damage. So you might want to swap that out depending on the situation. So depending on the enemy that you're fighting, you may want to swap between Divine Favor and Hunter's Mark, and Divine Favor is a buff to ourselves, whereas Hunter's Mark is something that we inflict on an enemy and have to kind of move between enemies using our bonus action. So, you know, you do have to kind of weigh your options as to what you want to use, but in most situations, Hunter's Mark should be the one that you're going for. However, you can sub that in for Divine Favor as you find it necessary. And we do get an extra spell at this level. I mean, it's kind of a take what you want type thing here. Again, we don't really want to be using our concentration on other things. I mean, you could bring Ceremony if you've got the Mistress Spells mod, which has some fun little side interactions you can go for. I don't know, it's more of a roleplay thing than anything else. At Paladin level 4, we're going to gain access to another Lay on Hands charge, as well as another feat. Now, at this point, I don't think we need any specific feats. Again, if you want to dual-wield non-light weapons, maybe the 2 finesse longswords in the game, that's always a favourite of mine, you could go for dual-wielder here. Would give you a bit of extra bonus, a bit of extra armor class as your two-handing weapons, as your dual-wielding weapons, I should say. Otherwise, there are a few other things that you could go for, I guess. If you went for that 15 starting charisma, you might want to pick up Shadow or Fey Touched to bump that up. If you didn't start with Fighter and you want to go for 3 levels of Paladin, 3 feats from Paladin at level 12, you could go for the Resilient Constitution feat here, giving your con a little bit of a bump. Maybe you started with a 15 in that. You know, you've got a few ways of kind of manipulating your stats and your feats here, but I'm just going to keep it fairly simple for the majority of players, and we're just going to go for a bump to our Dexterity to up our attack damage. At Paladin level 5, we're going to be finally getting extra attack, a level later than usual, but hey, it's going to work out for us regardless. This is going to allow us to now attack 3 times in a turn, twice with our action, once with our bonus action. Again, if you took 3 levels of Thief Rogue somewhere in this build, you would be able to make 2 attacks with your action and 2 attacks with your bonus actions, plural. So that could work quite nicely for this build, but again, I wanted to keep this pretty pure Paladin, and we do get some high-level features from Paladin, which I think are going to be quite nice for this build, so we're not going to be getting those today, but if you want to slot that into this build, you can, as I said. But now we're also on to level 2 spells, giving us access to Hold Person and Misty Step. Misty Step is obviously great for maneuverability, allowing us to get around the battlefield as easily as we want. But Hold Person obviously does have some cool things on this build as well. Obviously, it's great on the typical Great Weapon Master build because, you know, you always score critical hits, which means you get over the penalty and yada yada yada. However, it also works on this build because we can attack this our held enemy 3 times per turn. One of which is a Divine Smite. The others, you know, could have extra damage or something like that from other features that we'll talk about later. But, you know, so it has value on this build. I just don't know how it would particularly scale to the Great Weapon Master build. You may still want to focus on your weapon damage buffs, but otherwise this is still a great battlefield control option to consider. Otherwise, you do get to pick up some level 2 spells at this point. And there's nothing here that I really want overall, so it's kind of a pick your favourite situation. Unfortunately, Branding Smite does use a concentration, so I wouldn't really recommend that one. Warding Bond could be great if you want to protect an ally, and you can get more healing out of something like Prayer of Healing. At Paladin level 6, we're going to get our Aura of Protection. This is going to get us about a +2 bonus to our saving throws for us and nearby allies, so it's a nice little buff overall. At Paladin level 7, we're going to get another subclass feature. For us, it's Relentless Avenger. If you hit an enemy with an opportunity attack, your movement speed increases by 1.5 meters on your next turn. This actually has a lot more synergy than you might think with this build, as a lot of enemies will actually end up running away from us, and this will allow us to pursue them, as we will be able to make opportunity attacks against them quite easily. So I quite like this feature here. We're also going to get access to more spells, but you can just pick what you like. Next up, at Paladin level 8, we are going to gain access to another feat, and I'm just going to take an ability score improvement and bump up our dexterity to 20. At Paladin level 9, we get access to level 3 spells, including Haste, which, you know, is good for obvious reasons, and Protection from Energy. Yeah, don't use that one. However, we do get some pretty interesting options here, from both the vanilla game and Mistra's spells. We're going to get access to Blinding Smite, which doesn't take our concentration and can potentially blind our targets, which is on theme for this build. More on that in a minute. But also we do get to pick some other cool options. Namely, if you have the Mistress spell mod installed, Spirit Shroud. Spirit Shroud is kind of like Spirit Guardians, but it works a bit differently. You call 4 spirits to fight. Nearby enemies have 3 meters of reduced movement speed, so very similar to Spirit Guardians. However, whenever you attack a nearby enemy, deal an additional 1d8 radiant, necrotic, or cold damage. You choose which damage type you'll get when you first cast a spell, and you can prevent your opponents from regaining hit points until your next turn. This is basically going to be our main concentration damage boosting spell from here on out. It's the biggest consistent damage boost we can get. It's obviously bigger than Divine Favor and lasts longer, and it's bigger than Hunter's Mark most of the time. Also, being able to choose the damage type is huge, so we can overcome any resistances that come near us, as well as the fact that this is going to apply to all of our weapon attacks, both with our action and our bonus action, so dual wielding is very effective, and it comes with the bonus that we get to negate hit point regeneration. This is going to be our main option. If you've got a level 3 spell slot, this is what you're casting first before any Divine Smites. Plus, it's a bonus action, so you just get to use your main attack and extra attack on the first turn you cast this anyway. It's literally a win-win. Use this spell. As for the rest, it's up to you. I quite like Warden of Vitality, giving you the ability to kind of use your bonus action to heal yourself and nearby allies just after you cast a spell for 10 turns, which is really nice. It's not concentration either. And then finally, I kind of like Crusader's Mantle because it does fit the theme of the build. It's not going to boost our attacks, but it is going to boost our allies' attacks. So it fits the theme, but you're probably never going to use this over Spirit Shroud. At Paladin level 10, we're going to get Aura of Courage, meaning that us and nearby allies cannot be frightened. Really good. We're also going to get an extra lay on hand charge for more healing. Again, this build gets a lot of healing, which is nice to have. We also do get to prepare another spell at this point. Take whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Then finally, at Paladin level 11, we're going to get a super cool high-level feature that I almost never get to show off. That being Improved Divine Smite. All melee weapon attacks you do deal an additional 1d8 radiant damage. Yeah, this is really good. Obviously, It applies to normal paladin attacks, is stacked with regular divine smite, so it's obviously good on the original Great Weapon Master build, but for us, that's 3d8 extra radiant damage per turn if we use all of our attacks, which is very, very nice to have. This will apply to every weapon attack that we do, including Spirit Shroud in that. That is 6d8 radiant damage, or maybe an extra 3d8 necrotic or cold or whatever, on all of our attacks. Yeah, that's a lot. And obviously we're going to be getting even more stacking damage in a minute when we get to the equipment section. So there's a lot of good things to love here. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a lot of damage. You're a solid tank because we took mostly full martial levels, meaning that we're sitting at a nice 112 HP on tactician. We get a ton of different options available to us for battlefield control, like things like hold person, tons of different ways to increase our damage throughout the whole build, slowly upgrading as we go, going from divine favor to Hunter's Mark to eventually Spirit Shroud. We're going to get the 2 auras to help with defensive tactics. We're going to get a bunch of healing as well, and just I mean, look at this, we're going to get 44 healing from Lay on Hands, which is awesome. You're just going to get a ton of stuff out of this build that's going to help you be an effective dual-wielding character, while playing a mostly paladin, which, to be honest, you don't see a lot of dual-wielding paladins in this game, so I think it's a nice twist on the usual builds you expect from paladin. And again, we're still getting all the massive amounts of power. I mean, look at this. That's still a lot of damage even without Great Weapon Master, but we'll talk about that a bit more in a second. Shadowheart, can we turn around, darling? Can we turn around? Shadowheart. Shadowheart, face the right way. Shadowheart, please. Alright, don't look so angry at me. There we go. Right, let's talk about the equipment next. So, we have a lot of things here. Ignore all this on the top. That's just from my personal playthrough, because I did do a full playthrough with this save file. And so we have a lot to talk about, though, with all this stuff down here. So, let's get onto it. First up, the weapons. Now again, I did kind of want to go with a light and darkness theme with this build, again kind of alluding to Shadowheart's kind of theme, which is why it's the Oath of Vengeance, because she's definitely taking vengeance against Shah once she realizes what that goddess did to her. So I think taking an Oath of Vengeance as a paladin makes sense, and balancing the elements of light and darkness in her life between things like Divine Smite, but then also having things like a weapon that inflicts blindness, again we'll get to that in a minute, as well as also having, you know, the kind of edgy things that like the Vengeance Paladins get, Spirit Shroud being able to do radiant or necrotic damage. You know, there's a little bit of a theme of light and darkness here, which I kind of like. But again, that's a tangent. Let's talk about our main weapon, the Justitia's Scimitar. What, just because she renounced Shah doesn't mean she's going to give up a damn good weapon. But the Justitia's Scimitar is a light finesse weapon, which we need for dual wielding, and if we attack with advantage, you know, we have a chance of blinding our target. So we have ways of blinding our target with darkness or with light, which I think is kind of a nice little thing to have. As well as it's a +2 scimitar, which is great, and in addition to this, it's also going to come with Shadow Soaked Blow, allowing us to strike an enemy, adding our proficiency bonus to the damage, and moreover, if the attack hits, it deals an additional 1d6 psychic damage. We can use this once per short rest. So this is a pretty damn nice attack to have, dealing multiple different damage types, so it works out quite nicely power-wise. I really like this weapon, so I wanted to include it here, and again, it lets Shadowheart kind of conquer her past, and use what happened to her advantage. Literally, because you attack with advantage. For your offhand weapon, I mean, there's the obvious choices. We got things like the Knife of the Undermountain King, which also works as a great early game weapon, and we also have something like the Hunter's Dagger here, which I thought could also be a fun early game option for you. But for the main offhand weapon that I wanted to go with, we have the Gleam Dance Dagger. This always shines with a glowing light within 6 meters unless you toggle it off with the passive. Again, going for that light and darkness theme. But while it's in your offhand, it's a +2 weapon, and it gives you a +1 bonus to your armor class. And because of all the damage stacking that we're going to have on this still does a lot of damage in the offhand despite just being a dagger. But of course, if you want a little bit more power, you can just slap a short sword or a scimitar or what have you on here. And overall, I really like this weapon. It gives us a bit more tankiness, it fits the theme perfectly, and I think the combination of these two weapons just looks really, really cool. I can't explain why, I just think it does. And of course, with everything put together, we are coming out with a 24 armor class. That is nothing to sneeze at. So, let's take a look at the rest of the equipment now. First up, the Helmet of Grit is going to be your late game option. Just because we don't have Thief Rogue doesn't mean we can't have 2 bonus actions. While we have 50% hit points or less, we have an additional bonus action, which means more offhand attacks, more bonus action spellcasting, which will allow us to do that and attack in the same turn, as well as the fact that we have so much healing available to us and a large pool of hit points. Getting to below that 50% HP threshold is not going to be very dangerous for this build, and when we are at that threshold and we feel like we are in a bit of danger, boom, we just pop Lay on Hands and get 44 of that HP back, and suddenly we're chilling. So I think Helmet of Grit works perfectly for this build. However, in the early game, grab the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. This is mainly here for if you want to use damaging spells, things like Thunderous Smite, or something that requires a saving throw like Bane. This will help you with that. Whenever we deal damage with a weapon attack, remember, could be up to 3 in a single turn, we gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns, giving us a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell save DC for each turn. So for 3 attacks, that is a +6, which is insane. This Arcane Acuity is one of the most busted status effects in the game. So this is just going to help us if you want to do offensive spellcasting with this build, but otherwise, you don't really need to. Next up, for the armor, for your endgame armor, we're going with the Armour Agility. Yes, it's basic, yes, it's the power building option, but honestly, this build I just kind of wanted to power build with, and this armor works so well for this build. And it plays really nicely into Shadowheart as well. It's going to add our full dexterity modifier to our armor class, which is obviously 5 because we maxed out our dexterity, meaning that we're getting a ton of AC here, coming with the base 17 armor class, but additionally, this armor does not impose disadvantage on stealth ability checks, and gives us a +2 to saving throws. Great for our concentration. This means that we can kind of play into Shadowheart's stealthy Sharan nature, still being able to sneak around even though we are, in a brilliant white outfit. We're still going to be able to stealth, which means we can take advantage of Shadow-Soaked Blow's concealment effect as well, meaning that this just makes so much sense for this build that it felt stupid not to include it. However, for some early game and alternative options, we have the 1T Scale Mail, which does a very similar thing, but instead is slightly less on the base armor class and gives us a +1 bonus to initiative rolls. So yeah, overall, I think it's okay. It's one of the best looking armors in the game, in my opinion. I love like the way it kind of drips down and has like the kind of neckerchief here. Like, I think it works brilliantly for this build, but obviously the Armour of Agility will be a straight upgrade later on. However, because we're using the Gleam Dance Dagger, we can go for the Luminous Armor as well. Whenever the wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a radiant shockwave, allowing us to inflict Radiating Orb, which, if you don't know, Radiating Orb means that we can inflict a -1 to attack rolls for each remaining turn. So basically, we would keep attacking enemies with radiant damage, and then they would be consistently getting, a debuff to their chance to hit, meaning that we're just never getting hit. But we do have a slightly lower base armor class, and this is capped at +2 from our dex, so we would not have as high of an AC. You might want to boost that up with some other items. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. I do think the Armour of Agility is the stronger option overall, but that is another option if you want a fun interaction. Next up, the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. Again, if they're good, why not use them? This allows all of our weapon attacks to deal an additional 1d4 necrotic damage, again, light and darkness. And because we are going to be doing so many attacks in a turn, this adds up. However, as much as I like these for the build more thematically, there is a mechanically better option in the Hell Dusk Gloves, giving you a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell save DC, and having all of our weapon attacks deal an additional 1d6 fire damage. However, fire damage is more common and more often resisted. Just because it's a bigger damage line doesn't necessarily mean it's always the better option. However, this will give us a bit of a boost to our strength saves and the Razor Fire cantrip for a decent ranged fire attack, but I just prefer the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets here, man, so I think we're just going to go with that. And finally, for our boot option, we do have the Boots of Striding. These are just pretty much a standard on all of my builds that are heavily concentration focused and can wear medium armor, like this build. Whenever we cast a spell that requires concentration, we gain momentum for 1 turn. That gives us a bit more movement speed, meaning that we can cast our concentration spell, then run straight into melee combat a bit easier. But while we are concentrating, we cannot be knocked prone or moved against our will. So any slippery surfaces that would knock us prone just don't, and enemies that can do so, like the Steel Watchers, also just cannot do anything. This is kind of a free slot if you're willing to take that risk of losing your concentration because of certain effects like that. You can go for the Evasive Shoes for just an absolute overkill on the AC. or any other standard good option for your boots. Even the, the Boots of Persistence could work quite well for the Longstrider and, the Freedom of Movement spell, just being applied at all times. So feel free to change this one up, but this is a great early game option that I recommend and will be great throughout the whole game. Next up, the Spell Savant Amulet. This is just an extra level 2 spell slot for us at all times. So we get 4 level 2 spell slots instead of the usual 3. That's great. For a paladin with limited spell slots, we definitely want that. And next up, these 2 rings are both free slots. Feel free to slot in whatever you like here, but these kind of do fit the theme of the build a bit. The Caustic Band is going to give us an additional 2 acid damage flat on every single weapon attack. That adds up with the amount of attacks we can do on each turn, as well as a similar effect from the Callous Glow Ring. Because we have the Gleam Dance Dagger, we are constantly going to have creatures illuminated because of the light we emanate. So we're always going to do an additional 2 points of radiant damage. It misses the radiant part in the description, but it is always radiant damage. So overall, between these two, we're getting an extra 4 damage on all of our attacks. That is going to stack up pretty nicely when we're going at full power. With all of the attack stacking we have from all of our different pieces of equipment, like just stacking on additional damage, plus Divine Smite, plus Spirit Shroud, plus the improved Divine Smite, we are just going to be doing so much damage each time with each of our attacks, but I genuinely do think that it stacks up to the Great Weapon Master build. Do I think it's better than the Great Weapon Master build? I don't know. I'll quickly go over the fact that this is dyed in the Bahamut dye from the Faerunian Colours mod, again available on all platforms, but the combat footage will already be playing at this point. Yeah, so here's the thing. Is this as good as the Great Weapon Master build? Honestly, kind of not. In BG3, like, there's so many different ways we can boost that playstyle, and if you think about all the equipment that I'm wearing right now, that could still just be used to boost the Great Weapon Master playstyle with an extra 10 damage on 2 attacks. And technically, if you get the kill, or get a critical hit, which you could guarantee with something like the Killer's Sweetheart or Luck of the Far Realms, then you can still attack with your bonus action. Hell, go with a level 11 Paladin and throw in a level of War Cleric, and you've got 3 bonus action attacks per long rest. So, in all honesty, I think the Great Weapon Master build is still better. However, because that comes with the caveat of having to get an advantage from Vow of Enmity and all that, with this build we don't actually need that, so I think you have a little bit more freedom in the subclass that you choose for Paladin, which can lead to advantages in many different ways. If you want to make a slightly more heal-orientated and tanky variant, go for Oath of the Ancients, like something like that, right? Also, this build has room to put in 3 levels of Rogue for Thief Rogue. You'd be giving up some of your overall HP, and obviously you'd be giving up improved Divine Smite and level 3 spellcasting, which means no Spirit Shroud. However, you would be able to get Sneak Attack by using the Finesse weapons that we have, and that might stack up, especially with a Killer's Sweetheart critical hit. So it's entirely up to you if you want to kind of go down that route as well. But again, with this build that I have here, as power built as it is, compared to the Great Weapon Master build, I think both have advantages and weaknesses. And I do think it entirely depends on the class fantasy that you want to play. I personally think the idea of a dual-wielding paladin is really, really cool. And I think that the fact that 2024 D&D allowed for that, and is what inspired me to make this video, is a good thing. I think, and this is kind of going into my opinions on the tabletop thing, but I do think the Paladin needed a bit of a shake-up. So I'm quite happy that that I was able to make this, and that it is as powerful. Like, I'll be honest, this is comparable to the Great Weapon Master build. It will stand on its own just as well. Because let's be honest, the Great Weapon Master build is overkill in a lot of situations. This is just slightly less overkill. So overall, do I think this build is worth it compared to the usual two-handed variant? Yes, absolutely. I think this is still a fantastic build that is great for this game, and I think you will be able to go all the way with this on Tactician or even Honor mode and be absolutely fine. So yeah, my overall verdict, yes, dual-wield Paladin does work. It works very, very well, which I'm sure a lot of people already knew. But yes, that is going to do it for me for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.